The 380 is a round that many people love to make fun of, but in all seriousness, I have personally seen 380 and its effects in the real world, and while it may not have all that knockdown power that people love to talk about, it's still a very viable choice if you choose the right ammo. And now that we have a Springfield Hellcat in 380, being this one right here, there's really 5 really kind of top reasons why 380, specifically in this Hellcat, is actually a really good choice for a EDC setup. First, and probably one of the bigger reasons, due to the size of this thing, I mean, just look at it compared to the size of my hand, it is extremely easy to carry around with you. Lightweight, small package, so it makes carrying something concealed in pretty much any type of clothing very easy. And number 2, since people love to make fun of the 380 caliber, if you actually choose the right ammunition, it's an extremely viable choice for a carry rig, especially if you want it to be small. And the third reason for this pistol specifically, the Hellcat series has been out for quite some time now, and it's pretty well proven out there in the industry. And the fourth reason specifically for the Hellcat here is it comes with all of the options you want on a carry pistol. And we're gonna get into all of these things, but everything from the grip texture to the actual metal night sights that are usable when you put an optic on there. And the fifth reason, and this is big for some people because this little Hellcat's a small pistol and the Hellcats have been known to give a different or harsher recoil impulse to some people. Since this thing is in 380, it's gonna have a lot less perceived or felt recoil. I think we need to start off with something a little bit funny, so I'm gonna go ahead and roll this in for you. Fucking missed with a 380. Well, that was pretty bad. I absolutely whiffed that C-zone still from like 10 yards on that drill, but pretty pathetic. You have to own those things when they happen though. We do have to mention a couple of the channel sponsors here because they help keep the lights on and everything moving around here. First up, Shell Shock. It's the ear and eye pro I wear. Great stuff. Link and code down below for ear and eye protection. HRT Tactical, they make that soft kit for your hard LARP lifestyle out there. I wore that stuff on duty, personally, professionally. Great gear from belts to plate carriers. Everything you pretty much need. And also Die Frico, who's making those Kung Fu grips, the Tiger Claw for out front on your rail, and now the DOS boot to extend your Magpul PMags. All that information will be over at the build list, which will be linked down below, and I'll put a QR code right up here for you. Now the Hellcat 380 right here. So if you're not familiar with the Hellcat, it's a little fella, right? As you can see by the size of my hand right there. So if you're a bigger guy or a bigger gal, you can see that my hand is just going to consume that entire pistol right there. And you need to be aware of that because sometimes smaller pistols can be a little bit more difficult to run, especially when you're doing magazine exchanges, and they can be harsher on the recoil or the perceived recoil. However, since this thing is 380, it's got a lot less recoil than even its 9mm counterpart. So that's kind of a non-issue. And yes, people like to poke fun at the 380 because it's smaller, it doesn't have much recoil, less so than a 9, much less than like a 45, but as long as you use the right ammunition, you can still get really good end results. Like if you want that FBI style testing penetration, you just really got to be choosy with the ammo. The pistol itself is pretty much exactly like the previous generation Hellcats, just with a little bit less recoil. Weighs about 1 ounce overall less, plus a tiny little bit of extra weight savings in the difference between the grain weight of a 9 and 380, which is pretty minimal. Running something this small from concealment for me is a bit of a challenge since I usually carry something along the size of like a PDP Compact, a 43X with a magwell, something in that Hellcat Pro size category. But we got it done out there and it actually runs pretty fast and pretty light on the recoil, which was to be expected because it's 380. And even though it's the same size as the 9mm variant of the Hellcat, it seems to be slightly more controllable. When it comes to carrying and using a pistol this small, though, there are a few things that you really need to take into account. One of the big ones for me, if you've got bigger hands or longer fingers, you really have to pay attention to that trigger guard, right? So you can see how much farther my finger goes than the trigger guard on that. So you really have to be cognizant when you're getting in there to get around that trigger guard to be able to get a very good placement on the trigger and not pull back and end up slapping that trigger the first time because your finger caught the end of the trigger guard right there. Next up, you do get 2 magazines with this. One will have the extendo right there, which actually gives a pretty decent grip, even for like XL plus size hands right there. And then you're gonna get a flush fit mag, which does have the ability to take that little pinky extension setup right there, so you can still get a pretty good grip. However, if you are using the flush base pad that does come with it, you're gonna have that like 2 fingers on pistol if you've got a bigger hand. So you can see pretty much nothing there, and you just need to get used to that. So if you've ever held something like a Glock 26, subcompacts like that, That's the feeling you're gonna have if you're running that flush mag. When you are actually running this thing out on the range, your manipulations really have to be on point. Just due to the size of everything here, especially on magazine exchanges, you've really got to get your hand out of the way so you don't catch all your skin right here. And then the size of this thing, working the slide. So you've got to practice a little bit more with smaller pistols in general, at least in my opinion, especially if you're used to carrying larger variant pistols. As for how this thing runs out there on the range, I tried several different ammunition types to include some self-defense, and I had zero problems with cycling, which is pretty much what I expected because I've had multiple Hellcats in the standard size, the Pro variant, and a bunch of my friends actually own and carry these things. If you don't know, these are actually made by HS Product in Croatia, and then Springfield is the importer. Now, HS Product has done a very good job with the Hellcat series and most recently the Echelon pistols. While it is small, it actually runs pretty easily and controllably. Now, granted, I'm a bigger guy and it's only 380, but I think even people with smaller hands or smaller stature would have a very easy time running this pistol. The things I think that the Hellcat has always done right is that 1-inch grip width and the texture. It's like sandpaper and it is everywhere around the key interface areas that your hands are going to touch the pistol, even forward on the frame where it has those reference marks for your offhand thumb. It's got great metal bolt night sights that are usable with an optic ready direct to slide, a decent striker fired trigger, an accessory rail up front, good serrations front and rear, and a lot of these things are out there now, so they seem to be very trustworthy and reliable. So to answer the question, would I actually trust a Hellcat to EDC? Yes, I would actually carry a Hellcat Pro variant in a fanny pack a lot with me. I know, kind of funny, yeah, I walk around the fanny pack, but it's a tactive fanny, so I guess that kind of makes up for it. I will roll in the spec sheet for those who want to read that, so you can pause and go through that if you wish. Even though this is a smaller pistol, I did want to do some distance with it just to see what could happen. So we went from 25 to 100, and I'll roll that in now. 25, 35, 50. All right, fuck it, let's go to 100. It is definitely capable out to 100 yards. You just got to figure out that point of aim, point of impact. There are a couple of really nice finishing touches on this pistol that a lot of other manufacturers don't do. And I'll roll in some footage here to show this for you. But as the round is feeding into the barrel, the feed ramp is polished, but also the whole circular area right there at the entrance of the chamber, that area is not only deburred, but polished. That's going to aid in feeding that first round in there, which is pretty cool because that's a nice extra step that can make sure the thing's more reliable that most other companies don't do. Also, you'll see right across the top right here, that little chamber indicator, so you can see if a piece of brass is in there. That's actually cut in a very specific way to kind of help deflect gases away from the optic glass. And it did seem to work out there. I didn't have to wipe the front of the optic off the entire time we were out there running this thing on the range. Another cool little touch is you'll notice the spring right there, the front of it right there, just extends slightly past the barrel and the slide. There's a reason for that. That is for standoff or for contact engagements, right? So if you ever press the muzzle of this into something, this is going to touch it prior to the slide and that barrel, so it's not going to get pushed out of battery and render that thing useless, right? So just a nice little touch. It's also got texture on it, which is pretty much the same as the size of the grip. So you can kind of drive into things if you're training like that or out there in the real world. And then out on the front of the frame right here, there's these little texture points right there, but they're actually depressed into the side of the frame. So you can actually get the meat of your offhand thumb in there, which is going to help you control recoil just a little bit more, especially since it's a smaller pistol. Now that was a lot of good stuff, but we all know that nobody gets a free pass here on the Tactical Considerations channel. So was there any problems or was there anything I think could be a little bit better when it comes to this Hellcat 380? We didn't have any cycling problems. Like I said, there's a lot of these things out there now, but there's a couple things or maybe a few things I thought that could be just a little bit better, or maybe the audience would need to know. The first one being that this slide, the weight of the spring in there and everything, it's going to be much more of a traditional weight. So if you think that this is small and it's going to be easier to rack, like some kind of the easy designs out there with super light springs, it's still going to be stiff. So if you're got smaller hands or maybe a little bit weaker wrists, or you've got some arthritis, be prepared that this thing, even though it's got good slide serrations front and rear, it's going to have a fairly stiff kind of standard spring feel to it. This next one is something I say about pretty much every pistol, and that is, instead of this kind of shaved off design right here, and I know they're trying to keep this thing very small, I would love to see more of a magwell design here, like a natively flared magwell, or a magwell that could be removed and then put on if you desire one. And I know that would be tough just, due to the size of that thing, but I think especially on something this small, it would just be such a positive benefit for doing magazine exchanges, training with your pistol out there like you should, because just a little bit of extra surface area, and you can see how tight that is in there, would just be a big help, especially if you've got larger hands. Even though it would only catch those first 2 fingers most likely, that's going to help you a lot with not only that initial purchase when you grab the pistol from your holster, but also doing those faster magazine exchanges. Other than that, I actually think it's a very solid setup, especially if you are looking for something in the 380. Well, it is movie night with the wife, so make sure you get subscribed to the channel. Remember, if you stay ready, you ain't got to get ready.